Please eat, eat. The night is very cold.
The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and neither had the hunger in Nia's stomach. She counted the last of her tteokbokki into a paper box, the only meal she had left after Yeon Min-hyuk's men emptied her cash box for the second time that week. Across the alley, a man sat folded into himself against a wall, soaked to the bone, invisible to everyone who passed him. Nobody else saw him. Nia did. She knelt in the mud in her one good pair of shoes and held the box out to him with both hands, the way her grandmother had taught her to give, like the receiving matters more than the giving. The man looked up. His eyes weren't the eyes of someone broken. They were the eyes of someone watching. Min-hyuk's men laughed. One of them kicked her cart into the gutter, calling her a fool for feeding a dog when she couldn't even feed herself. Nia didn't flinch. She lost everything else that night. She wasn't about to lose the one thing that was still hers to give. She was 25 years old, alone in a city that had never once been gentle with her, sending everyone she scraped together back home for her grandmother's medicine. Kindness was the only currency she had left, and she spent it anyway. What Nia didn't know was that the stranger's sleeve had slipped just for a second, revealing a watch worth more than her entire cart. What she didn't know was that 3 black sedans were already turning onto her street. The homeless man closed his hand gently around hers before she could pull away. "Tell me your name," he said. "I intend to remember it." She had no idea that 4 words were about to unmake everything Yeon Min-hyuk thought he controlled, or that the man kneeling in the rain across from her hadn't eaten in 2 days by choice. If a single plate of food could change someone's entire life, would you have given it away, knowing you might go hungry yourself? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever given away your last anything, not knowing what it would come back to mean? Stories like Nia's remind me why I keep writing these. So if her journey moved you even a little, stay close. Subscribe, ring the bell, and let's find out together what happens when kindness meets a man who never forgets a debt. The rain in Seoul never fell straight down. It came sideways, driven by the wind tunnels between the glass towers, and it turned the night market into a river of neon reflections. Red from the tteokbokki stalls, blue from the phone shop signs, gold from the string lights nobody had bothered to take down since Chuseok. Nia had learned to read the rain the way other people read weather apps. Light rain meant customers huddled under her awning, waiting out the drizzle, buying one more skewer while they waited. Heavy rain meant the street went empty in under 4 minutes, and 4 minutes was exactly how long it took for her to lose an entire night's earnings. Tonight the rain was heavy. She wiped down the metal counter for the 3rd time, not because it needed it, but because her hands needed something to do besides shake. The tray in front of her held maybe 12 ones worth of unsold tteokbokki, rice cakes gone soft in their sauce, and a single carton of eggs she wouldn't be able to use before they spoiled. Behind her, tucked into a coffee tin she kept bolted under the counter, was 140,000 won. It was supposed to be 200 by tonight. It was supposed to be enough to wire home to her grandmother before the pharmacy closed on Friday. She heard him before she saw him. Yeon Min-hyuk didn't walk through the market so much as part it, the way a fin parts water, and everyone in a 50-meter radius suddenly found something urgent to do with their eyes. 2 of his men flanked him, close enough to be a wall, far enough to leave room for what was coming. "Busy night," Min-hyuk said, resting one hand on the edge of her cart like he owned it. He didn't need to say the rest. His hand said it for him. "It's slow," Nia said. The rain doesn't pay me." He smiled, the kind of smile that had never once meant anything warm. 600. Tonight. Or we talk about your license again. There was no license. There had never been a license. Not one Min-hyuk had any legal claim over, but legality had stopped being the operating currency of this street a long time before Nia arrived. She learned that in her first month the hard way, when a cart 2 stalls down had simply stopped existing overnight. Awning, fryer, owner, all of it gone, as if the block had exhaled. "I have 140, she said. "That's everything. I can bring the rest Thursday, I swear on my." "You said that last week." "I know, but you know what I think?" Min-hyuk crouched slightly, bringing his face level with hers, the smile gone now, replaced with something colder and more patient. "I think you like the drama. I think you like standing here every week telling me your sad story, hoping I'll feel something. He straightened up. I don't. He reached into the coffee tin himself. Nia's hand shot out. Not to stop him, she knew better than that, but some old instinct that hadn't caught up to reality yet, and one of his men caught her wrist before it got anywhere near his boss. Not hard, just enough to remind her what her hand was for. Please, she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. My grandmother's medicine. Not my problem. Min Hyuk pocketed the 140,000 won like it was nothing, like it wasn't 3 16-hour days and a blister on her palm from the walk handle. Thursday. All of it. Or I stopped being polite. He turned to go. That should have been the end of it. A bad night. A worse week. The kind of loss she'd learned to absorb and keep moving through, because stopping to feel it meant she might not start again. But then his eyes drifted past her cart to the alcove beside the noodle shop, where a shape sat huddled against the brick, and something in him decided he wasn't quite finished being cruel. You, Min Hyuk called out. Get out of the light. You're bad for business. The man in the alcove didn't move. He was folded into himself, knees to chest, a jacket that had once been something, maybe canvas, maybe wool. Now just a dark, sodden mass clinging to his shoulders. His hair hung in wet ropes over his face. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, and from the way his shoulders shook, like the cold had gotten past his skin and into whatever was underneath it. He's not hurting anyone, Nia said before she could stop herself. Min Hyuk looked at her like she'd grown a second head. You're going to defend a beggar? Tonight? He laughed, and his men laughed with him, the practiced laugh of people who got paid to find their boss funny. Thursday, sweetheart. All of it. They left the way they'd come, parting the crowd closing silently behind them like nothing had happened at all. Because nothing had, not by the standards of this street. This was Tuesday. This was normal. Nia stood very still for a moment, feeling the shape of the night collapse in on itself. 200,001. Grandmother's blood pressure medication. The letter from the clinic she hadn't opened yet because she already knew what it said. She looked down at the coffee tin, empty now except for a few coins that had fallen to the bottom, and felt something in her chest go quiet in a way that scared her more than crying would have. She looked up, and her eyes found the man in the alcove again. He hadn't moved. Nobody had brought him anything. Not in the 20 minutes she'd been half aware of him sitting there. Not in. She didn't know how long. Honestly, because a homeless man on this street was furniture, the kind of sight your eyes learned to slide past, so the guilt didn't have anywhere to land. She looked at her tray. 12 ones worth of stock. One good portion, maybe if she scraped the pan clean and didn't count what she was giving up in the process. Don't, said the practical part of her, the part that had gotten her through 3 years alone in a foreign city. You need everyone. You need every bite you can sell. But she was already reaching for the ladle. She plated the last of the tteokbokki, scraped the sides of the pan for the good, thick sauce, and added a boiled egg she'd been saving to eat herself once the cart closed. Steam rose off the box in a thin white ribbon that the wind kept trying to steal. She crossed the wet cobblestones and crouched in front of him, the way her grandmother had taught her. Low, so you weren't looking down at anyone, so the food arrived at the same height as their hands. Here, she said. It's still warm. He lifted his head slowly. Up close, his eyes weren't what she expected. Roomy, defeated eyes were what she expected. What she got instead was a stillness that unsettled her a little. Dark eyes that looked at her not with the dazed gratitude of someone half gone with hunger, but with something more like attention. Like he was reading her. What? His voice was rough and used. Because you're hungry, Nia said, like that was the whole of it, because to her it was. He didn't reach for the box right away. You don't have much, he said. It wasn't a question. I have enough for tonight. It was a lie, and she suspected he knew it was a lie, but he took the box from her hands anyway, his fingers brushing hers, and for just a second his sleeve rode up. Nia's eyes caught the flash of metal before her brain fully processed it. A watch, heavy and gold-cased, the kind of thing that cost more than her cart, her apartment, and everyone she'd ever wired home combined. It looked utterly out of place against his frayed, filthy cuff, like a diamond sewn into a burlap sack. She blinked, and he'd already tugged the sleeve back down. Thank you, he said, and something about the way he said it, measured, deliberate, like he was filing the words away for later use, made the hair on her arms rise, though she couldn't have said why. "You're welcome," she managed. She stood, brushing rainwater off her knees, and it was in that exact moment, steam still curling off the box in his hands, her palms still warm from his, that a boot connected with the wheel of her cart. The cart went over sideways. Metal shrieked against stone. Her fryer oil sheeted across the cobblestones in a black, glistening wave, and her remaining stock, the eggs, the fish cakes, the little jars of pickled radish she'd made herself, scattered into the gutter in the rain. "Should have paid," Min Hyuk said. He hadn't left after all. He'd been watching. "Maybe next time you'll remember who owns this street instead of playing charity for gutter trash." His men laughed again. A small crowd had gathered at a careful distance, phones half raised and then lowered, because filming Min Hyuk's business was its own kind of dangerous. Nia dropped to her knees in the ruined street, gathering what she could, her hands shaking now for a different reason than the cold. She didn't cry. She'd promised herself a long time ago that she wouldn't, not here, not where it could be used against her. She just knelt in the wreckage of 3 years of careful, exhausting work and gathered the pieces with hands that had gone numb. When she finally looked up, the alcove was empty. The homeless man, food box and all, is gone. Nia didn't sleep that night. Not really. She sat in her one-room apartment above the laundromat, the ruined carts while propped against the wall where she dragged it, and did the math over and over on a torn receipt, because the number never changed no matter how many times she checked it. 140,001 gone. A fryer that needed new gaskets she couldn't afford. A landlord who'd already given her 2 final warnings about the rent. Her phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. It was her grandmother's neighbor, Mrs. O, who had never once called with good news. "Nia," Mrs. O said, her voice careful in the way people got careful right before delivering bad news. "Your grandmother's blood pressure was very high again last night. The clinic called. They said if she doesn't get the new prescription by Friday." "I know," Nia said. "I know. I'll send it." She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap, staring at the ceiling stain shaped vaguely like Jeju Island, and let herself, for exactly 90 seconds, feel the full weight of how close to the edge she actually was. Then she stood, splashed cold water on her face, and went to see what could be salvaged from the wreck. She was still sweeping shattered glass out of the alley behind her building when the first black sedan turned the corner. She barely noticed it. Sedans belonged to a different soul than the one she lived in, until it slowed, and a second one pulled in behind it, and a third behind that, forming a small, gleaming convoy that had no business being on a street this narrow, this poor, this forgotten by everyone except Min Hyuk's collection schedule. Her landlord, Mr. Beck, was already outside her door with Min Hyuk beside him, the two of them in negotiation over a fresh set of arrangements that Nia was fairly sure ended with her on the street by nightfall. She caught the words eviction and immediate through her open window and felt her stomach drop through the floor. Then the first car door opened. The man who stepped out wore a charcoal suit, so precisely tailored it looked less like clothing and more like architecture. Every line of him, the posture, the pace, the stillness with which the world seemed to rearrange itself around him, belonged to someone who had never once had to ask twice for anything in his life. 2 more men flanked him from the second car, and from the way Min Hyuk's whole body changed the instant he saw them, spine straightening, color leaving his face, Nia understood with a slow, sick certainty that whoever this was, Min Hyuk was afraid of him. It took her another 3 full seconds, 3 seconds of staring, uncomprehending, at the sharp planes of a freshly shaven face, to understand why the eyes looked familiar. They were the same eyes, dark still watching. The rain had washed away the grime. A barber, or someone paid a great deal to act like one, had cut away the matted, ropey hair into something clean and silver-shod at the temples. But it was him, the man from the alcove, the man who had eaten her last plate of tteokbokki with hands she now understood had never once in this life gone hungry by accident. Min Hyuk's mouth opened and closed without sound. "Chairman," he finally managed, and the word cracked in the middle like ice underfoot. I wasn't told you'd be. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." Explain what? The man said. His voice was the same rough register from the night before, but stripped now of the performance of weakness. It landed like something dropped from height. That you kicked over the car to the only person on this street who fed a stranger without asking what he had to offer in return. Min Hyuk's men had gone very still. Nia realized, distantly, that they weren't looking at Min Hyuk anymore. They were looking at the man in the suit, waiting to see which way the wind was about to blow, ready to break for whichever side survived the next 30 seconds. Sir, I had no idea it was you. That's the point, the man said quietly. You didn't need to know who I was to know what kind of man you were being. You knew. You did it anyway. Nia had come out onto the landing without fully deciding to, gripping the rusted railing, watching a man she'd fed out of pity revealed as something closer to a small walking storm. Her landlord had already backed halfway into his own doorway, the eviction papers forgotten in his hand. The man in the suit turned, and for the first time, his eyes found her on the stairs. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but settled, like a decision that had already been made was simply being confirmed. Chaegal Young-ho, he said, to her, as if the introduction mattered more than anything happening below him. I believe I owe you a debt, miss. Nia, she said, because it seemed important, somehow, that he have the right name for whatever was about to happen. Nia, he said the way he'd said thank you the night before, like he was filing it away permanently. Then his gaze moved back to Min Hyuk, and the warmth in his voice, what little of it there'd been, vanished entirely. Take him. What happened to Min Hyuk after that? Nia only ever heard secondhand, in fragments passed along the market grapevine over the following days. That he'd been taken not to a police station, but to a private floor of a building downtown few people were allowed above the lobby of. That whatever conversation happened there left him without his territory, his men, or, according to one particularly breathless retelling, most of his teeth. She never asked Young-ho directly. Some part of her understood she didn't want the details confirmed. What she knew for certain was this. By Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Beck had personally delivered an envelope to her door containing 6 months of prepaid rent and an apology so nervous it came out as a stammer. By Wednesday evening, a new cart, steel, gleaming, twice the size of her old one, had appeared outside her building with a note that said only, "A replacement is not repayment. Come to the address below at 9 tomorrow. CYH." The address was a glass tower in Gangnam that Nia had walked past 100 times without ever once imagining she'd have a reason to enter it. She stood in the lobby the next morning in her one clean blouse, feeling every eye in the marble atrium catalog and dismiss her in the same glance, until an assistant with a tablet and a professionally neutral face escorted her up 31 floors to an office with a view of half the city. Young-ho stood at the window, not turning immediately when she entered. "Do you know what the Chuan Syndicate is?" he asked. "Everyone knows," Nia said carefully. "Nobody says it out loud." "Good instinct." He turned then. In daylight, in his own space, he looked less like a man in disguise and more like the disguise had been the truth all along. The tenderness she'd fed on the street somehow still present in his face, just buried under 30 years of armor. "I go into that market once every few months. Not as a test to the vendors. As a test of the men I put in charge of them. Min Hyuk failed a test he didn't know he was taking. And I passed when I know I was taking either," Nia said. "You didn't pass a test," Young-ho said. "You simply didn't know there was one to fail. That's rarer than you'd think." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I'm not offering you charity, Nia. Charity is what I give to people I feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for you. I'm offering you a position. Chuan Group's management trainee program. 6 months. If you survive it, there's a career on the other side worth more than every one Min Hyuk ever took from you." Nia sat down slowly, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "Why me?" "Because you gave away your last plate of food to a stranger who looked like he had nothing to offer you in return," Young-ho said simply. "I have spent 30 years surrounded by people calculating what they can extract from every interaction. You weren't calculating anything. That's not a small thing. In my experience, it's the rarest thing there is." She thought of the coffee tin, empty except for a few coins. She thought of Mrs. O's voice on the phone, careful with bad news. She thought of her grandmother's blood pressure and the letter from the clinic she still hadn't opened. I don't know anything about corporate management, she said. I know how to keep a fryer at the right temperature and how to talk a customer out of walking away angry. That's it. That, Young Ho said, will matter more than you think. He slid a folder across the desk. 6 months. If it isn't for you, you walk away with severance enough to clear whatever debts you're carrying, and then some. If it is for you, he paused, then we'll see how far honesty can actually take a person in a building full of people who've forgotten what it looks like. Nia opened the folder. Her hands were steady this time. When do I start? She asked. She started on a Monday in a lobby so clean it made her own reflection look like an intrusion, wearing a blazer she'd bought secondhand and pressed twice to hide the wear at the cuffs. The other trainees were already gathered near the elevator bank when she arrived. 8 of them, all sharp-edged and confident in the particular way of people who had never once doubted they belonged somewhere. One of them turned as she approached. He was tall, expensively unbothered, with the kind of smile that had clearly opened every door it had ever knocked on. Tae Sung-ho. She'd learned the name soon enough, along with exactly how much it would come to matter. You're the street vendor, he said, not quite a question, his eyes doing a slow, deliberate pass over her blazer, her shoes, the small chain at her throat that had belonged to her grandmother. I'm Nia, she said, and held out her hand. He didn't take it. Interesting, he said instead, to the trainee beside him, loud enough for the whole group to hear. I heard the chairman picked up a charity case off the street. I didn't realize he meant it literally. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Careful, calibrated laughter, the kind designed to be deniable if it ever got back to leadership. Nia let her hand fall back to her side, feeling the old, familiar heat rise in her face. The exact same heat she'd felt kneeling in the gutter while Min Hyuk's men laughed at her ruined cart. She'd survived that. She understood, standing in this marble lobby in her secondhand blazer, that this was simply a different kind of alley, and these were simply a different kind of men who thought cruelty was the same thing as power. The elevator doors opened. After you, Sung-ho said, with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes, stepping aside just enough to make the gesture look like courtesy to anyone watching from a distance. Nia stepped past him without flinching, chin level, the way her grandmother had taught her to walk into rooms that didn't want her in them. The doors closed. The numbers began to climb. And somewhere above her, in an office with a view of half the city, a man who had once eaten a stranger's last meal in the rain was already watching to see exactly how she'd survive what came next. The complaint reached Human Resources on a Thursday, typed in the careful, bloodless language people used when they wanted cruelty to look like process. Concerns regarding trainee qualifications. Concerns regarding hiring transparency. Concerns regarding whether proper channels were followed. 11 signatures. Sung-ho's name was 4th, positioned with just enough distance from the top to look like he hadn't organized it, though everyone in the trainee cohort knew exactly whose idea it had been. Nia found out about it the way she found out about most things in that building, sideways from a junior assistant who liked her enough to whisper warnings in the elevator. She spent the rest of the day running numbers for the Q3 procurement review with her hands perfectly steady and her stomach in a slow, cold knot, because she'd learned by now that the two things did not have to be connected. You could fall apart. You just couldn't do it where anyone could see. She thought about quitting. Not seriously, but the thought arrived anyway, the way it always did in the evenings, when the marble floors emptied out and she was alone with the hum of the HVAC and 11 signatures she hadn't been shown but somehow already knew by heart. You don't belong here. She'd heard some version of that sentence her whole life, from landlords and loan officers, and once from a woman at a coffee shop who'd assumed she was staff and asked her to clear a table. She'd survived all of it by getting smaller, faster, more careful. The building wanted her to do the same thing now. Get small. Apologize for taking up space you hadn't earned. She didn't. On Friday morning, an all-staff meeting notice went out with 2 hours' notice. Unusual enough that the entire 31st floor stopped what it was doing to speculate. By the time the atrium filled, standing room only, 300 employees packed shoulder to shoulder beneath the glass ceiling. Nia understood, with a sinking clarity, that this was about her. Young-ho didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply stood at the front of the room, hands folded, and let the silence do the work first. 11 of you signed a document questioning why Nia is part of this company, he said. I want to save you the trouble of wondering whether I read it. I did. Every word. Nia stood near the back, half hidden behind a support column, wishing she could disappear into the marble. You raised concerns about her credentials, Young-ho continued. About her background, about whether she followed, and I'm quoting here, proper channels. He let that sit for a moment. I'd like to explain something about how I built this company, since apparently that history had gotten lost somewhere between the boardroom and business school. He walked, unhurried, toward the center of the atrium. Every one of you was hired because a piece of paper told me you were capable. Degrees, references, interview scores, useful information. I don't dismiss it. But it tells me nothing about what a person does when nobody's watching. Nothing about what they're willing to sacrifice for someone who can't repay them. Nothing about the one quality that has never once, in 30 years of running this company, failed to matter more than every metric on that piece of paper. His eyes found Nia across the room, and something in his expression softened just slightly before hardening again as he turned back to the crowd. Character. The atrium had gone completely silent. I met Nia on a night when I had nothing, he said. No name that meant anything. No watch that would have impressed anyone. Nothing to offer in return for kindness. She gave me her last meal anyway, at a moment when she could least afford to. Not because she recognized power, because she recognized hunger, and she decided it mattered more than her own comfort. He paused. I have executives in this room with 3 advanced degrees who have never once made that calculation in their lives. Nia felt her face burn, every eye in the room shifting toward her at once. So let me answer your concerns directly, Young-ho said. She is here because she has something this company runs desperately short of at the top of its org chart, and I intend to make sure it stays in the building. If any of you have further concerns about the proper channels that brought her here, my door is open. I'd be curious to hear them in person. Nobody moved. That's all, he said and walked out. The room stayed silent for a long moment after the door closed behind him, and then, slowly, unevenly, the crowd began to disperse. In 2s and 3s, murmuring, careful now not to look directly at Nia as they passed her. She understood, watching them go, that the vindication she'd just been handed was also, in its own way, a target painted on her back. Being defended, that publicly by the chairman, didn't make her invisible again. It made her impossible to ignore. Sung-ho caught her eye across the thinning crowd. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look on his face, cold, unreadable, calculating, told her everything she needed to know about what came next. The Cheonggi Hotel project landed on her desk 6 weeks later, and Nia understood immediately, reading the file, that it was either the greatest opportunity of her life or an elaborate trap dressed up as one. The site was 3 blocks from the market where her car used to stand. A crumbling, half-abandoned commercial block the city had been trying and failing to redevelop for a decade, tangled in permits, community resistance, and 2 previous failed bids from competing firms. Lead director. Her supervisor told her, sliding the folder across the table with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely sure whether he was handing her a promotion or a punishment. Multi-billion-won acquisition. Chairman's direct assignment. She knew why he'd chosen her before she'd finished reading the first page. This wasn't a hotel. This was her old neighborhood. The alley where she used to buy her radishes, the noodle shop where the homeless man used to sit, the exact grid of streets Min Hyuk had once treated like a personal tax base. Everyone else on the executive floor saw a distressed asset. She saw home. The other trainees assigned to previous phases of the project had approached it the way they approached everything. Spreadsheets first, community second, if at all. Their proposal had promised luxury towers and glass facades, and it had died in city council after 11 separate community hearings turned into 11 separate riots of frustration from residents who felt, correctly, that nobody involved in designing their neighborhood's future had ever actually walked its streets. Nia walked its streets. She spent her first 2 weeks not in the boardroom, but in the market itself, buying tteokbokki from vendors who didn't recognize her in her tailored coat, sitting in noodle shops listening to shop owners complain about foot traffic and rising rents, taking notes not on a tablet but on the backs of receipts, the way she used to. She learned that what the block actually needed wasn't a monument to Chew One Group's ambitions. It needed ground floor space preserved for the vendors who already lived there, affordable units above it, and a design that made the neighborhood better instead of erasing it. When she finally presented her revised proposal to the executive committee, Sung-ho sat 3 seats down the table, arms crossed, watching her with the particular stillness of a man waiting for a mistake he could point to. "You're proposing we cap luxury unit density," he said when she finished, "in favor of preserving space for street vendors. In a multi-billion won development. I'm proposing we build something the neighborhood actually wants," Nia said, "which means it gets approved faster, costs less in community litigation, and generates goodwill this company hasn't had in that district in a decade. The vendors aren't a liability to design around. They're the reason anyone will want to walk through the ground floor at all. That's not how luxury development works. It's how this development works, or it doesn't get built," Nia said evenly. "I spent 3 years running a cart on that exact block. I know what makes people stop walking and start spending. It isn't marble." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then, from the head of the table, one of the senior partners, a man who'd been skeptical of her from the first meeting, set down his pen. "Send me the revised numbers," he said. "If the math works, I'll take it to the board myself." The math worked. 3 weeks later, the board approved her framework unanimously, and for the first time since she'd walked into that glass tower in a secondhand blazer, Nia let herself believe, just slightly, that she might actually belong there. Not despite where she came from, but because of it. Sung-ho didn't congratulate her. He watched her walk out of that boardroom with an expression she'd come to recognize. The particular, brittle stillness of a man calculating exactly how much longer he could stand to watch someone he considered beneath him succeed. The international investors arrived on a Tuesday morning in a convoy of cars that would have made Min Hyuk's old fleet look like a child's toy collection. Representatives from a Singaporean hospitality fund, the kind of capital that could make or break a project of this size with a single signature. Everything rode on this presentation. 6 months of community meetings, redesigned floor plans, 3 separate approval processes, all of it converging into one 90-minute pitch in a boardroom on the 40th floor. Nia had rehearsed it 40 times. She knew every number, every projection, every contingency cold. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until she was already 6 slides into the presentation, watching confusion ripple across the faces of investors who had, until 30 seconds earlier, been nodding along, was that Sung-ho had accessed her files at 2 in the morning and quietly altered a set of financial projections deep in the appendix. Not obviously, not in a way that would flag in a casual review. Just enough, inflated risk figures, understated revenue timelines, to make her look either incompetent or dishonest in front of the one audience whose trust the entire deal depended on. "These numbers," said the lead investor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Tan, tapping the screen with one finger, "don't match the figures your team sent us in the preliminary deck. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Nia felt the floor tilt beneath her. She looked at the slide. She looked at her own notes, printed neatly the night before, and the numbers didn't match. Not because she'd made an error, but because someone had gone in after her and changed them carefully, deliberately, with exactly enough precision to bury the sabotage where it would only surface in front of the people who mattered most. Her mind raced through the options in the space of about 4 seconds. She could stall. She could claim a printing error and promise a correction, buy herself time to figure out what had happened, and quietly fix it before anyone noticed the pattern. She understood clearly what nearly everyone in this room would have done in her position, and nobody would have blamed her for it. She looked up at Young-ho, seated at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable, watching her the way he'd watched her that first night in the rain, like he already knew which choice she was about to make, and was simply waiting to see if she knew it too. She thought a coffee tin, empty except for a few coins. I can't explain the discrepancy, Nia said, because I didn't create it. These figures don't match what I submitted, which means someone altered this file after it left my hands, and I don't yet know who or why. I'm not going to guess at numbers I can't verify in front of you. I'd rather stop this presentation right now and come back with figures I can personally stand behind, even if that costs us today. The room went very still. You're telling me, Ms. Tan said slowly, that you're stopping a multi-billion-dollar pitch to admit you can't verify your own data. Yes, Nia said. I'd rather lose this deal telling you the truth than win it on numbers I'm not certain are real. You're not just investing in a building. You're investing in whether you can trust what my company tells you. I'm not going to break that trust to save myself an embarrassing afternoon. For a long moment, nobody said anything at all. Then Ms. Tan sat back in her chair, and something in her sharp expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated, the way people looked at something they hadn't expected to find in a room full of polished projections. In 15 years of doing this, she said, I have never once had someone stop a pitch to tell me they might be wrong before I caught them at it. She glanced at her colleagues. That's worth more to me than a perfect slide deck. We'll review the corrected figures. I suspect we already know what our answer will be. Young-ho didn't wait for the room to clear before he acted. He simply stood, walked to the door, and asked security to pull the building's access log for the file server, effective the previous night. It took less than an hour to find what he already suspected he'd find. A login timestamp 2:14 a.m., a set of edits made to Nia's presentation files, a trail Sung-ho had been careful about, but not careful enough, because he'd never imagined anyone would look until it was too late to matter. He was called into Young-ho's office by mid-afternoon. Nia wasn't present for that conversation, and she never asked for the details, but she heard, later, that security footage had been the deciding piece. Sung-ho's own badge, his own face, time-stamped and unambiguous. Walking into the server room at 2 in the morning with the particular, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once considered that he might get caught. He was gone from the building by the following morning. No severance package softened by kind language. No quiet transfer to another division to save face. Just gone, the way Min Hyuk had been gone from the market. Swiftly, completely, without ceremony. Nia found out from company-wide memo, 3 sentences long, that named no reasons and needed none. She thought she'd feel triumphant. Instead, standing at her office window that evening, looking down at the city lights smearing gold across the wet pavement 40 floors below, she mostly felt tired. The particular exhaustion of having spent months bracing for a blow that had finally landed and then, just as quickly, been taken away. Young-ho found her there an hour later, the office empty around them, the building settling into its nighttime quiet. You could have lied, he said, without preamble. This morning, you could have stalled, corrected it quietly, and no one but you and Sung-ho would ever have known the difference. I know, Nia said. Why didn't you? She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things. Because the first time anyone in this city ever trusted me with anything, it was because I didn't calculate what I could get away with, she said. I didn't feed you that night because I thought it would come back to me. I fed you because you were hungry and I had food. If I start calculating angles now, I don't know what I even am anymore. Young-ho was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the same skyline she'd been watching. When Sung-ho is escorted out, he said finally, he'll want to know why you didn't fight harder for his removal. Push for something worse than losing his job. I don't want to destroy him, Nia said. I know what it feels like to be desperately afraid of losing everything. I don't need to hand that fear to someone else to feel like I've won. I just want him to do better, somewhere far away from here. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had that first night in the rain, before either of them understood what the moment would become. That, he said quietly, is exactly why I gave you the coffee tin's worth of trust one had left after 30 years of watching people prove me wrong about that. They gave her the restaurant on a bright, ordinary Tuesday, 3 months later. No press release, no grand ceremony, just Young-ho handing her a set of keys outside a renovated storefront 2 blocks from where her old cart used to stand, its windows freshly glazed, its awning a deep, warm red that caught the afternoon light. It's yours, he said, permanently, not a trainee assignment. Not a probationary gift you could lose if a quarter goes badly. Yours, the way that first plate of food, was yours to give away without expecting anything back. Nia stood on the sidewalk with the keys in her hand, and for a moment, she couldn't speak at all. She thought of the coffee tin, of Mrs. O's careful voice on the phone, of a letter from a clinic she'd been too afraid to open. She thought of her grandmother, whose medication had never once run short again since that first chairman's transfer had cleared her debts entirely, and who would be flying in from home in 3 weeks for the opening, healthy enough now to make the trip herself instead of trusting it to photograph. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "You don't have to say anything," Young Ho said. "Just do what you did that night. Keep giving away what you have to people who need it. The rest tends to take care of itself." 6 months after that, standing in her office on the top floor of Chuwon Group's newly formed commercial hospitality division, CEO now, a title she still sometimes forgot belonged to her when she saw it printed on her own door, Nia looked down on the market below, alive with steam and neon and the particular chaos of a Tuesday evening rush, and noticed a boy, maybe 16, sweeping the gutters outside a noodle shop with the kind of careful, exhausted diligence she recognized instantly. Because she'd once worn that exact expression herself. She didn't send an assistant. She rode the elevator down 31 floors, walked out into the cool evening air, and crossed the street with a warm plate of food in her hands. The same gesture that had once cost her everything and then, impossibly, given her a whole new life in return. "Here," she said, crouching low, the way her grandmother had taught her, so the food arrived at the same height as his hands. "It's still warm." The boy looked up at her, startled, uncertain whether to trust a stranger's kindness in a city that had rarely offered him any. Nia only smiled and waited because she understood better than almost anyone alive exactly how far one warm plate of food could travel and exactly how long it could take to find its way back around.